thank you for this awesome intro. And now I don't know if I can live up to that, but we will see. Hello, how are you after lunch? Hopefully you're not in a food coma right now, as I am. Oh, do we have my slides? Is everything working? Whoa. Okay, well, I guess we'll just deal with flickering or not flickering screen. Anyhow, yeah, we'll do something fun here. I think so. We will be ranting about technology and frameworks and tooling, so what we obviously love to do. So a quick intro, I came here from Poland, so not that far away from Krakow. I work for a company called India that's located in Richland, Washington, all the way in America. Talking about tooling, if you think about the concept of tooling in general, and first tools that were introduced long time ago, that was 3 million years ago, so that's like a long time ago. And a tool is usually a physical item that can be used to achieve a certain goal, and in our programming/software engineering concept, that's a process or procedure that is serving a specific purpose or goal. And when you think about our current times, we have a plethora of tools that are bound to make our lives easier, but that's not necessarily the case. So I like to ask the question of, okay, like we have so many frameworks, so many tools, so many open source projects that can make our developer lives very easy, but on the other hand, do they really achieve that goal? I feel like nowadays we're assigning empowerment to the choice of utilities and tooling. And I think that, is that my mic? Not touching it. So we're assigning empowerment to the choice of utilities in our tools. When I think that the choice of the tool isn't necessarily something that makes you 100% great designer or developer. And I really love this quote from Paul Jarvis from his book, The Good Creative. If a carpenter loses his nail gun and has to use a hammer, he doesn't become less skilled. A programmer doesn't forget to code if she switches computers or even programming applications. A writer's stories are no less valid because he changes from black to blue ink. Creatives aren't good at their art because of their tools. Their talent stems from the skills and the knowledge they acquired while using their tools. Of course, tooling is great and it has a decent amount of influence over the quality and the speed of our creations, but again, the question remains, how do we define which tools are going to do that for us? Because obviously not all of them are going to be super useful and very helpful for our particular use cases. So this talk is going to be a little bit all over the place, and I want to start with defining simplicity. And since we are talking about defining subjectively right toolkit for ourselves, I think it's really worth it to define what simplicity and complexity are. So the idea of simplicity keeps reappearing in discussions about software and design very often. But I feel like the idea of simplicity is very misleading in a way, because we can observe two types of simplicity. One is visual simplicity, so we look at things and we're like, oh, that sounds like this tool is very easy to operate, like I would totally know how to use that. And the other one is operational, which is when we actually try to use a certain thing and we can say for certain that it's simple and it's easy to use. So when we try to define simplicity, we could say that in a way it means sanity, because when we think about technology, we live in a superabundance of information, and the most crucial skill isn't multitasking, but single-threading our attention. We're overwhelmed by tooling and also by information that's at our disposal. There's just so much stuff that we could be consuming right now, like the whole concept of FOMO. So it's impossible to handle. It's impossible to keep up, even like with technology and information that's available. This drive for simplicity is superficial. So we want simplicity, but we don't really think about why we want it. We're like, well, everything would be great if it was just simpler. And that's like the statement that people often use, but they don't really think about like, why would it be better because it would be simpler? What's the reason of our frustrations? Why are we really striving simplicity? We kind of assume that if we make things simpler, we are getting rid of our frustrations, whatever they might be. So we fail to notice that complexity is a necessary ingredient for our lives as developers or lives in general. Complexity is a fact of the world, simplicity is in the mind. So we want to be empowered, we want to be more capable, we want to be using devices, and we want to be using hardware, we want to be using technologies that are available for us at our disposal. But on the other hand, at the same time, we want be able to understand how stuff works, and we want usability. So we defined simplicity, we touched on complexity a little bit. So complexity can be defined by how much time it takes to learn an item, or how much information you kind of have to digest to be able to achieve something. So it kind of resides in the place in our understanding of how things work. So as humans, we create conceptual mental models of how things work, how objects operate. So we tend to accept arbitrarily very complex solutions in our daily lives all the time. We just don't really realize that, and we don't think about it. Complexity is a constant. It's something that is in our lives every single day, and even when we decrease so-called user-facing complexity, it will rise somewhere else. And I really love Tesla's law of conservation of simplicity that says every application has an inherent amount of irreducible complexity. The only question who will have to deal with it, you as a developer or someone who's using whatever application or website you've created. So tools are bound to save time, and savings in time feel like simplicity. And I think that's one of the reasons why technologies, real-time technologies like Node are very popular, because it's fast. And there's an implicit benefit in savings in time and good tooling and automation as well, because you can spend that time that you just saved for something else, not necessarily work, or you can just spend it somewhere else because it's at your disposal. So now that we went through this short introduction of what simplicity is, where complexity is, and we talked about some concepts of software engineering, I would like to focus on front-end tooling more specifically, because this is what I do. I'm a front-end developer for most of the time. So when you think about front-end stack, you think that we are using CSS preprocessors a lot, Sass, less, stylus. We are using templating engines, J or Hamlin, Ruby environments, and whatnot. So we are bound to use run builds and run tasks of different kinds. We run performance-related tasks such as minification, file concatenation, image optimization as well. So these processes should be automated. You don't want to be spending your time by like going to your terminal and rerunning all the tasks every single time you made a change. Like that would be a huge waste of time, and you don't really want to be doing that. So yeah, I would like to focus on specific tooling for the front end that some of them might be quite obvious to you, some might not, but I feel like it's really worth it to talk through them. So we need to automate tasks to stay productive and focus on problem solving that simply cannot be delegated, because machines are great, but not necessarily amazing at solving all our problems. So we should be delegating everything that can be delegated and can be automated to computers, and we should be focused on something else. So getting into specific front-end tooling. First tool that I want to mention is called Autoprefixer, and since we all like working at the bleeding edge of the web, and we all love playing with standards and new specifications as well, we want to be aware of the state of implementation in the browser. So we don't really want to be going to canIuse.com or other sites that have data like that and be trying to figure out, oh, is it working yet? Should I be using this? Or how many vendor prefixes do I need? You just want to be writing code and not thinking about that. So auto prefixer is one of my favorite things because I just don't worry about vendor prefixes anymore because it will append them to my CSS that I write, or stylus in my case. And it will check the specification, implementation state against canIuse.com data, and will append vendor prefixes wherever necessary. The second tool that I want to mention is linting and CSS line specifically. So I'm not kind of sold or on the idea of CSS linting per se. I think it's very preferential, and of course there are some rules and guidelines that are very universal, and every single person, in my opinion, should be following them. But on the other hand, some of them are very preferential. So I think the topic of linting is very useful, especially for people who are less maybe front-end savvy, because it provides guidelines for them. And you can also provide your own guidelines in CSS line. You can define them. So I think it's a preferential choice, but it's a good tool to have in mind if you're looking for kind of more quality control and more cohesiveness in your code base. And another really important topic, especially when they think about performance, is media optimization. So making sure that all your media is served in the smallest size possible. So Image Optim, SVG OMG, and TMI, some great names here. Image Optim is probably the best tool for optimization. It has a command line tool, and it has UI as well. It provides a lot of algorithm for compressing PNGs and JPEGs. SVG OMG is built on top of SVGO by Jake Archibald and has awesome UI on the webs, and it works offline as well. And TMI is a super handy CLI tool written by Eddie Osmani, who's amazing. And he wrote like a bunch of amazing tools for front end and performance as well. It will basically test your project and tell you whether some images are non-performant, as in you can still crush their size. And then, since we are talking about performance and minification and whatnot of images, we should also minify our code. And there are a lot of modules. There are a lot of tools that will let you do that. I usually use Clean CSS or Node CSS Min, but there are so many. You can choose something that will suit your preferences. They're pretty similar. Most of them, I think, are based on UI compressor. I think you should just look for whatever works for you and gives you suitable options that you want to use. And then, since we touched the topic of optimization, we want to be avoiding code bloat. So we want to be trying, especially when working with frameworks, we want to be trying to be searching and removing unnecessary unused declarations, which is a common thing that happens when you're using especially bigger frameworks like Bootstrap or Foundation or Pure even. So there's UnCSS and Helium CSS, and majority of the tools that I've mentioned already, they either have a UI or command line tool, and these are command line tools as well, but they require a little bit more setup than the other ones. You can't just run one command and it will magically scan your code base and just get rid of all the stuff that you don't need magically. That's not how it works, unfortunately. So it cleanups your state sheets based on querying the DOM for selectors, and it checks them and makes sure that you're not including anything that's not necessary. And since we talk about performance, I think that it's a little bit of a different type of a tool, because it's not really just running something in command line again, but it's more of a visual testing tools, PerfMap and Stress CSS. PerfMap is a very handy Chrome extension that will map your site, and it will show you which elements are non-performant by adding backgrounds. So if an image is very non-performant, like it's big, it will be red, and if it's green, then you're fine, which I think is a very fast way of determining whether you're doing good or not. And Stress CSS will check every single class in your website or application, and it will literally stress test it and let you know if any of them are hindering your performance, so you can actually debug and see which parts of your CSS are not performing very well. And of course, YSlow, Chrome Developer Tools Audit, Google PageSpeed, very basic, super obvious tools for testing performance. Of course, there are many, many more, and I could probably talk all day about just performance tooling, but I won't. Yeah, and since we talk about tools that are not necessarily super automatic to use, like Stress CSS or PerfMap, I really want to highlight this because I think it's the greatest thing ever. And it's a very simple tool called Pesticide, and all it does is a Chrome extension. It will outline all the DOM elements in different colors, so you can see your layout issues. And it might sound a little bit silly, like it's not necessary, why would I even use that? But I've been using it since Adam Morse wrote it, and it's amazing. It saved me so many frustrations over basically having super simple mistakes with, like in layout. It makes debugging so much easier. So if you're ever struggling with layout issues, please use Pesticide. It will save you, and you will be happy again. And a lot of these tools can be used as UIs, specifically for Mac environment. Hammer for Mac, CodeKit, Live Reload, I think, are the most popular right now. And they offer a limited set of features, mostly just running servers, so you can very easily access your project. Concatenation, minification, and compilation, they don't really do performance related, at least the last time I checked. So they're a good alternative if you don't really feel like doing stuff in command line for some reason. They're a good alternative, although quite limited. And I know that some of them had problems in the past with larger projects. So if you try using CodeKit, for example, I remember when you have more than 1,000 files, it gets really slow. So I just think that they're a good alternative for sure, but it's faster to do stuff in command line. So I kind of didn't want to touch this topic, but I will, since we were talking about tooling and stuff that makes our lives easier as developers and makes our project completed faster, potentially. I guess we should talk about frameworks. And I feel like in a way frameworks, CSS and HTML frameworks, are a bunch of components that are kind of like tooling bundles in a way. Because not only you have CSS and HTML snippets, but you also have this script for building, this script for minification, this script for something else. So it's really a bundle of different tools that you can use to start up your project, like HTML5 boilerplate, it's like a very minimal one, or baseline. So they can significantly reduce our development time for sure. And I think when we talk about frameworks, what comes to our mind is Bootstrap, Foundation, and in some cases Pure. And to not get me wrong, I have a tremendous amount of respect to people who write frameworks because I've done that, and it's tremendously difficult to build a framework, test it, and maintain it, even if it's a small one, something that you are writing just for your company. It just takes a lot of time. And making sure that it works on every single device, it's just so challenging. But I think that rather than having these frameworks, which are basically full-fledged interface builders, it's better to start with smaller things like Bass CSS or Tachyons. And these are smaller projects that you can find on GitHub. And they're way lesser known than Bootstrap or Foundation by Szczur or whatnot. But I feel like they're more unassuming, and they work on a principle that you start you start with very basic styles and very simple components that you need. So you're not doing this thing when you're including Bootstrap, let's say, or whatever, framework X, and you have so many components, then you need to figure out which parts to remove. So instead of doing that, you have this super minimal boilerplate, and you actually find yourself when you are like, maybe I can strip some CSS out of it because it's a framework, and for sure, like, I'm not using all of it. And you're like, actually, I'm using all of it. Like, I don't have to be optimizing anything anymore because this thing is so basic, and you can always gradually add on top of that. So I prefer the approach of, let's start with something super bare bones minimal, and then add something as the need appears, rather than just having this huge thing and including it from the very beginning and then trying to wrangle it. And since we were running through that quite fast, and we mentioned a lot of tools, this is a great resource. It's a GitHub repo with a bunch of front-end tooling and JavaScript tooling as well. It's just huge. So if you're interested in tooling, go there and you will waste several hours of your life for sure. But yeah, it's a great repository with pointers to various tooling that you can use. So if you're interested in some tools that I mentioned or something that I did not mention, it's probably there. So we talked about a bunch of tools, but I think that it's important to focus right now on how do we include them in our stack? Because, okay, like, we found a bunch of tools. Do we just go to the command line and run the task? That would be, again, like, counterproductive. Like, that's not something that we want to do. So I want to talk about NPM. I mostly work in Node environments, so NPM is something that I use all the time. And I'm pretty comfortable with using that. And I feel like a lot of front-end people are a little bit afraid of it because it's dubbed to be the thing for JavaScript and Node. So if I'm a front-end person that's not writing JavaScript, it's not for me. That's not true. NPM offers a native system for running tasks and automation. Because when you're defining metadata for your project in package.json, you can also define scripts. So if you think about NPM, as I've said, you might assume that is for JavaScript people or people doing Node specifically, but it's not. And people who are working at NPM are very interested in providing a better system for front-end people to be using NPM. So quoting their blog post about NPM and front-end packaging, they said the current support in NPM for front-end packaging isn't good enough, and NPM loves you front-enders, and we care about your use cases. And for my conversations with people who are working at NPM, they're actively working on making front-end development with NPM easier. So how do we actually include our tooling and automate our tasks with NPM? That's a super simple and very straightforward, not elaborate example taken from LevelDB website. So the only thing that it does, it runs the server, compiles stylus, and compiles Jade, and that's all it does. And you can do piping, you can pipe output from one task to another, you can run comment in parallel, or you can run a command after the previous one was executed. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you might not be able to achieve every crazy thing that you want with writing package.json and NPM scripts, but it's pretty straightforward for a simple website. So if you're interested in seeing that example in its full form, it's on GitHub. That's the first link, LevelDB-example. And if you're interested in using NPM for your task automation, there's a great article written by one of the most awesome people ever, James Substack, NPM task automation on bit.ly. And of course, I wonder if Eric is here. Are you here, Eric? I hope you are, because I'm talking about GULP. So I don't really use GULP and GRUNT for most of my projects, but they're very lively projects with big communities surrounding them, and there are alternatives to make. And you can not only you have to specify dependencies in package.json, but also create a recipe file in grunt-file.js or GULP-file.js respectively. And of course, there's an ongoing discussion: which one is better? Is Grunt worse? And the GULP rules, I don't know, like everyone is arguing which one is better. I feel like it's a preferential choice, and for sure, both of those are, like really amazing tools that can make your life easier. I think GULP might be more straightforward if you're someone coming from like a JavaScript Node background, because it's built on streams and it's like faster. So maybe that's more something more straightforward for you if you're a JavaScript person. Yeah, Grunt is a little bit more verbose, I would say. A lot of people are claiming that's a little bit too big and it tries to do too many things at once. I think that might be a case with a lot of tools, so I don't really dig that argument. But again, it's totally preferential choice. These are two awesome tools that are available for you to automate tasks. And the way it works, you have a recipe file, which is basically writing JavaScript, just defining GULP and getting a JS hint, and it just works. So I feel like it's pretty straightforward. And then there's make. And someone might laugh at me for saying this, but I'm using make for task automation at end yet. And it's our personal preference. And the way we're doing that, we are using a module that Philip Roberts wrote that's called Building Static Server, and we're using make in parallel. So the way it works, the Building Static Server module is running the server and watching the files for changes. That module is also managing live reloading if you have a live reload in Chrome, and it makes sure that you don't see outdated files when build is still going on while you hit refresh. So it's doing couple things. And then we're using make for defining our compilation tasks and whatnot. And this is a fragment of our default make file. So all it does, it just compiles CSS and transfers styles to CSS. So it's not black magic. A lot of people are afraid of make, and when you say make, they're like, oh, this is ancient technology. Well, maybe it is. I'm using it right now, and it's pretty great. Make is not really good at running long-running processes, so which is the reason why we wrote the module called Building Static Server. So I don't know. It's just an alternative that we are using, and it works pretty well for us. So I just wanted to show you a kind of like more, I guess, obscure example of how you can be using those tools. And if you want to check out the module, it's on GitHub, Building Static, and it's open source, so you can go for it and, I don't know, get inspired or even use it if you want. So after going through including the tools and how to run them through NPM or make or GULP or whatnot you're choosing to do, the question that I think is a little bit bigger than even the whole running question, but the question that I'm thinking about is when to run it. Because when you think about it, and the aspect of collaboration that I'm slowly getting at, is that you want to be empowering. You want to be empowering people to be contributing to your projects, right? Open source or at work, whatever, in whichever scenario. So the workflow of running builds, every single person has to run a build and has to run those tasks like in terminal, like they have to do it. They have to be able to execute that. It assumes a lot. It assumes that you have a certain setup. It assumes that you are okay with using terminal. It just assumes a lot of stuff. And that's not necessarily something that a lot of people are capable of. Like at Endiat, we have people who are doing only most of the team is familiar with front end as in CSS and HTML, but at different levels. And some people are doing only content, or they're doing some marketing changes, or I don't know, just something that doesn't even touch the actual code that much, or like they're editing markdown files which get translated to HTML. So we don't want to be forcing those people to be running builds and minification and stuff like that. That's not something that they should be caring about. So I think it's a good practice, maybe not in every single scenario of the tiniest website that you're building for your little pet project that no one is going to see, but in terms of thinking about collaboration, I think it's great to not to have those builds and tasks being run in development scenarios. So you don't really have to be committing like compiled sources to GitHub, because then you have a conflict because you forgot to pull changes, and now you have a conflict and you're only a marketing person and you freak out because Git conflict, just crying in the corner. So yeah, I mean, there are two very, very important concerns here. Solving merges, which I think, I don't know, people who are super okay with Git, they're like, whatever, it's something that I do all the time, so like I don't worry about it. But there are people who are not very savvy with Git, and it's a huge problem for them, and it will prevent them from collaboration contributing as well. And yeah, so I think that handling those tasks, automation tasks, should be happening pre-deploy of your websites or applications, and be handled by actually ops people who are just running scripts that happen pre-deploy rather than you doing it as a developer or as a person who is less front-end or just programming savvy. So I mentioned collaboration, and this is the most important part of this talk, so please pay attention if you weren't before. So the bottom line of all of this crazy tooling and frameworks and compilation and performance, I think the most important thing is collaboration. So the bottom line of all of this is empower yourself and others as well within your team or, I don't know, community, whatever, to build better and faster. So the starting point for doing so is not the choice of technology, although it might seem like that. I think the key ingredients to teamwork are getting rid of the kind of ego that we kind of have and putting the good of a team before personal preferences, because that often means negotiation, especially if it comes to tooling. Like, we just have our tools that we like, and this is the tool that I want to use. We're not going to use your tool, we're going to use my tool. So that means negotiation of set of tools that are going to serve us as a whole rather than just me as a person, because that is my personal preference. Technology is a mean to an end, but it will fail miserably if people can't work together, feel empowered, contribute, and grow. Because if you think about it, every single person that is joining your open source project or community or your team at your job, they have their own set of biases, predispositions, and preferences. It's like I've said, we have our favorite things, and that's what we want to use because that's how we are. But collaboration happens when these preferences are not clouding our good judgment and our reasonable decisions of choosing tools, what's best for the whole rather than just myself. Because what's great for me as an individual, a tool or practice, it doesn't necessarily scale, and I hate to use the word scale. Knowledge makes everything simpler. So when you think about teamwork, I think what comes to mind is process as well. And we hate the word process. We kind of despise formalities and having too much information and reading through the documentation. It's really something that seems tedious to us, and we don't really like doing so. But when you think about it in the context of collaboration, it's really empowering, because especially when you're creating tools, imagine the overhead of creating something and then there is no good documentation, so every single person will come to you and ask you questions, and you will waste a ton of time. So there's no point in having this tool, because now you need to waste another batch of time to be actually explaining what that tool is doing, right? So in my opinion, documentation is invaluable and can be very, very empowering, and it's really good to write documentation and maintain it, keep it up to date, and also consult with people who are especially maybe less, maybe not necessarily technology savvy, but just maybe not super fluent in the tool that you wrote or the framework that you wrote. So if they can understand it and they can comprehend it and they can work with it without your additional help, then you did your job well. And then I've said that Node might be so appealing because it's fast. real-time technologies. And I think one of many other reasons that Node is so popular is because it has obvious borrowings from, quote, Unix philosophy. This is something that everyone loves to quote. So breaking down data in modules makes it more digestible and more controllable, because that's obvious. I mean, you have modules of CSS or templates, and it provides the ease for you to find information, and also it makes debugging very easy. It's just so much easier to deal with information that are, you know, in chunks rather than just this huge thing. And often when you're talking about software, you hear those claims of like, this library is such a monad, this project is just such a monad, I hate it, I just can't work on it, it's terrible. But if you think about it, of course, like, it really might be huge and it might be a pain to work with, but on the other hand, it might be just bad structure and just lack of proper structuring and organization that is crippling this project. Maybe if you had super clean organization and modules, you would be able to use it no problem and you would love it. But so that's something that I think is very important to remember. And since we talked about a bunch of command line tools, I feel like, and I say that as a person who is doing both front end and design, so I guess by default, not really, I shouldn't be comfortable with command line. I feel like good tools, especially command line based, don't fail or succeed silently. And that might sound a little bit weird because, of course, it succeeds, so it fails, so it shows you a message. But for success, like, why would it show you a message? And I've seen a lot of tools that are not very super vocal about errors happening or even success messages, and it will give you the weirdest descriptions of the errors, and you just sit there in front of your laptop ready to throw it away because you're like, I don't understand this, or like, what does it even mean? And I think it really matters for collaboration to, when you're a person who's writing tools for the front end or anything else, to provide really good descriptions for errors and success messages as well. And if you think, well, that would be annoying to have to print so many informations when like the task just succeeded, like that sounds really annoying. But you can provide an option to maybe silent those for people who are not interested in seeing that. And then you're still maintaining this level of empowerment for people who are less, you know, savvy with command line, and it really freaks them out. So the aim to build bulletproof software is profound, but it's almost impossible to achieve. And it might be a blasphemy, but I think it's true. Our work is never done, and I think with complexity that we mentioned that is a constant, progress is another constant. And we really wanted to be building the best software ever, the most beautiful websites, like the most pristine code. But I think it's really important to remember that perfection is just really hard, and it's almost impossible to achieve. So I think in terms of getting back to this context of tooling, especially command line tooling, it's really important to eliminate erroneous input. So you can kind of anticipate user behavior and what people are inputting and passing as arguments to your tools. So you can create behavior shaping constraints that will eliminate some errors in input. So no one will be confused about your tooling anymore because you create patterns that, that will prevent that from happening. It's relatively easy to build overcomplicated solutions, but it's hard to maintain them. So we said that we want to work towards perfection and great software and great design. And it's a great motivation to have, but unfortunately, over-engineering, it's usually, well, it creates, it not only creates pressure for perfection, but also we waste so much time, and it doesn't necessarily empower it at all. There's a lot of preaching going on about the importance of shipping, and I totally agree with that. I mean, shipping is great. It's just the feeling of releasing something is amazing. There's a grain of truth there, but I think what's more important is actually trying to build something that works rather than just being super sophisticated. And I think that's another empowering collaboration pattern that you can use. So just trying to build something that is very easy to understand and comprehend for everyone, instead of trying to be, how can I craft this code so it's so artisanal that no one can understand it, even I can. And I really love this quote from Rachel Arnew. It might be due to me being old, but as I look at modern CSS toolchain, I fear we are very good at making simple things complicated. I think it's worrisome when things become abstracted and so reliant on tools that the core language isn't properly used and understood. It's easy to introduce unnecessary complexity by adding tools that manage other tools. And when you think about front-end tooling, I think that concern comes with packages. Because most of the tools that we mentioned are, despite the UIs, are just packages on NPM or Bower or somewhere else. And all major programming languages, they have their own package managers. But for front-end, it becomes a little bit shady because, so where the front-end tooling lives, what's the package manager for front-end? I guess Bower, component, but a bunch of stuff is on NPM or somewhere else, so it's quite confusing what to use. And then you end up using NPM for something, and Bower for something, and another manager for something else. So this is for you, Louis. This is for you. Brew, install Python, easy install pip, install Bower, install NPM, install -g, fuck you. And that's a module, so it's not my fault. I'm not swearing in my slides. It's a quote. Yeah, that's Louis. He's sitting like there. So if you like that attribution to the gentleman sitting right there. Yeah, I mean, there are differences and certain advantages in different package managers. It's just important to remember, this sound is so distracting. It's important to remember that you're introducing more complexity by adding more tools. So like if you have NPM, okay, great, but you need to understand what comes with using NPM or using component on top of that or using Bower on top of that even. And I think it's a concern that you have to remember, especially if we are talking about security. And I'm not going to talk about security because I'm not an expert on security, but if you think about node modules, for example, you don't really, I don't know how many of you realize when you're adding a module in your project that it might be doing some shady stuff and you wouldn't even know because you don't check their code and it's basically someone else's code that you're running in production. That's kind of scary thing if you think about it. I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but if you think about it, it's pretty scary. So yeah, you need to be aware of dependencies and potential technical advancements or that it might be bringing. So, wrapping this up very quickly. The right set of tools or lack thereof sets apart a craftsman from an operator. And I really want to close this talk with an awesome, shameless plug video. Not cats, no cats here. I don't know, it's going to work, hopefully. Is it working? No. Help. It sure work. It's not working. Well, I guess there will be no video. Sorry. Thank you.